afternoon, everybody. You can hear me at the back? Yeah, thank you. Fantastic. It's a privilege being here. This is the first time I'm standing in front of an audience in Dubai. So it's a big day for me. The only downside is I had to negotiate desperately hard at home to get Saturday off in Dubai. My son's going through his class 10 exam. So you can imagine the amount of pressure I'm under. So I've got to make this worthwhile for you and the audience. Pallav has also said, Pallav's offices are next door to ours. So Pallav has also said that we have to deliver for the DIAS today. So I'll try my best to make it worthwhile for you the next half an hour. What we've tried to describe in these slides is not so much in investing stuff. We've tried to describe what's happening in modern India. Because one of the most interesting things I find is not just when I go to America to pitch to the endowments over there, but even back home in India, what's happening in the country is poorly understood. And the Indian media specifically doesn't quite capture the extent of the change at home. Because we misunderstand the change, we're not able to invest in it. So let's first quickly start by looking at the past, right? If you look at the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whichever horizon you take, we've been amongst the world's leading stock markets in dollar terms. So these are dollar returns. And if you take, for example, the 20-year horizon, the Nifty's dollar return is 14% dollar TSR, total shareholder return, right? Which means had you invested, say, $1,000 in the Nifty 20 years ago in 2003, you'd be looking at something close to 21,000 already. So Nifty itself, without stock picking, is one of the best markets in the world. That's the past. By the way, a lot of people I've met in Dubai seem to have this greatly positive impression of China. So whether you look at China's own mainland China stock market or the Hong Kong stock market, the Hong Kong stock market's over here, the mainland China stock market, the Shanghai Composite is here. Chinese companies actually don't make a great deal of money. They neither make money in the stock market, or if you download the annual reports of Chinese companies, cash flows are close to zero, right? So what will happen to China in the next 10 years, I have no idea. Someone asked a very good question here on the future. I don't know what the future brings for Chinese companies. The last 10 years has brought zero cash flows for prominent Chinese companies. And if you look at India, the only other large stock market which is up there with India is the American stock market. On some other day, we can discuss why these two countries are increasingly similar. We think what's happening in India today is very similar to what happened in America 100 years ago, right? So roughly, this is the broad picture of American history we built up. 1860s, they had the Civil War. They killed each other. 1870s, they stopped fighting. 1880s, America built their railroad. They joined up the East and West Coast America. Astonishingly, by 1884, America was joined up coast to coast through railroads. 1900, a man called Alexander Graham Bell invented the phone, right? So 1900, they got telegraph. 1908, the Tesla of that era, Tesla of that era was the Ford motor car. 1908, the world's first mass-produced motor car, Ford came along. By 1930s, America had built the highway network, right? Quite stunning stuff. First country to build a coast-to-coast railway network. First country to build a coast-to-coast highway network. 1880 to 1930, every American company that you know of, leave the tech companies aside, leaving the tech companies aside, every American company you know of was created in that 50 years, right? So whether it's the names up there, or it's Wrigley's, it's Coke, it's Pepsi, those 50 years were defining 50 years for America. Why is that? When you take a large free market economy, you slam it together, you kill the local player, you kill the regional player, and you create vast national monopolies, right? So if you take a simple example, let's take tomato ketchup. In 1870s, tomato ketchup was a regional industry, very similar to achar or mithai in India today. Achar, mithai, agarbatti, these are regional industries in India. 1870s, ketchup was a regional industry. The most efficient ketchup manufacturer was Heinz. As the country got joined up, Mr. Heinz from Pittsburgh called up the ketchup manufacturer in Chicago and said, look, you have two options in life. Either you sell your company to me or I bankrupt you, right? And you can understand which option the Chicago ketchup manufacturer and then the Boston ketchup manufacturer and the New York ketchup manufacturer took. And that's how within 50 years, one man consolidated the ketchup industry in America. Similarly, breakfast cereal and Kellogg. The same thing is happening in India. The only difference is it took America 50 years to join up the country. In our country, we're doing it in best part of 20 years, right? The consolidation of India is happening at a rapid rate, and the result is people who've been historically skeptical about India, right? Constituencies globally that have been skeptical of India are finally coming around to saying that for the next several years, this will be the world's fastest growing economy, right? So we had a role to play in that cover story. There's broadly 4 drivers. You can, if you want the detailed version of what I'm going to talk about, the Economist, May edition of the Economist will give you the details. Broadly speaking, there are 4 drivers which are leading to rapid consolidation in the country, right? First driver, in the last decade, we have built thrice as much infrastructure in the last 10 years than we did in the first 60 years of independence. Right? That has non-linear impacts. Right? A country changes when you build triple the infrastructure in 10 years. Second thing, we are the only large economy within in the space of 5 years, the direct tax code and the indirect tax code has been completely revamped with huge impacts on the country. Right? The FM spoke about it in the budget. Tax collections are growing almost twice as fast as GDP. The impact of that on business life is big. We'll discuss that briefly. Thirdly, had Pallav and TMS Bazaar invited me in 2015 to this room, I would have told you in 2015 the Indian banking system is bankrupt. That was the situation then. Over the last 8 years, with taxpayers' money and stock market money, the banking system is recapitalized. This is now the world's strongest banking system amongst major economies, measured by Tier 1 capital. That has huge ramifications for the country for several years to come. And finally, the most nonlinear piece, the one that has no precedence neither in America nor China, what's happening on the tech front in India has really no precedence anywhere. It's non-linear, it's rapid, it's changing in front of our eyes, and we'll discuss some of the impacts of that. Once I've explained to you quickly what's happening in the economy, we'll get on to how it changes the nature of equity investing in our country. So let's start with the simplest layer. Let's start with infrastructure, right? So even though you live here, I'm sure you're sort of hearing from Indian TV channels, from Indian newspapers, the sorts of statistics I've given you in the top right table, right? Doubling of the road network in 10 years, trebling of bank accounts, trebling of the airport network, 50x growth in broadband, and so on and so forth. Those things are all true, but they don't go to the heart of what's really happening. So let me do a simple example to give you a sense of how non-linear this changes. A big part of our client base is in the Coimbatore, Tirupur area, right? These are textile manufacturers, apparel manufacturers. So till 2015, when I used to ask them, how long does it take for a truck full of textiles to go from, say, Coimbatore to Ludhiana? The answer 7-8 years ago was it takes 9 days, sometimes 8 days. And it doesn't matter whether you implement SAP, RFID, whatever you do, it takes 9 days because the truck stands at the state border anyway to pay octroi, right? And so in 2015, it didn't matter whether you were a smart textile company or a dumb textile company, everybody was equally screwed, right? Then we had the doubling of the road network. So if you go back to Coimbatore today and you ask an ordinary textile company, how long does it take? He'll say it used to take 9 days, now it takes 4 or 5 days. The road network is doubled, I go quicker, right? That's a benefit. But the same city now, same city, Coimbatore, Tirupur area, you ask the smarter textile companies, and they give you a completely different answer. They say it takes the ordinary guy 4 or 5 days, but I've already installed SAP and RFID, and since there is no state borders anymore, in the sense there's no octroi at the state border, the truck flies through state borders, courtesy FASTag, even the highway toll collection is done through automated RFID tracking. And then he will say, actually, Europe, I don't even run my own trucks anymore. There are 8 large 3PL, 8 large third-party logistics companies. They do the trucking, right? So there's no capital employed of mine in trucking anymore. The working capital cycle for me has shrunk. My cash generation has doubled because something that used to lock up my capital both in the truck and in the clothes in the truck, both of them have been released. So something as basic as moving goods from A to B now separates the men from the boys, the women from the girls, right? So I'll do several examples like this in the next 20 minutes. Effectively, operating in India in 2015 was like playing cricket in my building in Bombay. I'm awful, but in my building I'm Virat Kohli because everybody else is so bad. That was corporate life in India in 2015. Corporate life in India today is like my going to play in the IPL first ball, my stumps will be blown apart because the nature of competitive intensity is ramped up so dramatically over the last 8 years. Now, I gave you a simple example of transport. The most dramatic example of how infrastructure has changed India is this bottom left chart, right? That is mobile data volumes in India. India now uses more mobile data than any other continent in the world. Forget country, no other continent generates as much mobile data as India. And the story started in 2017 because why did mobile data take off in 2017? Jio, right? Jio, 273 rupees per Mbps to basically free now. From 273 rupees per Mbps to free. In fact, on that point, the office complex where PMS Bazaar and we sit, the security guard watches free movies all night because it is free. No, he's watching free movies sitting in, he's supposed to be guarding our office, but he's watching free movies on Jio all night. Now, what happened was as Mukesh Ambani ji made broadband free, roughly 20 companies realized that the empires of the next 10 years is not building factories and opening shops and all that nonsense. Roughly 20 companies realized that the empires of the next 20 years are getting into all your phones in India, those of us who live in India, and cleaning the phone dry every minute of every day, right? Each of those 20 companies are making billions of dollars and all of them are keeping their mouth absolutely shut, right? And that's a definitive signature of modern India. All the promoters who are killing it, every single one keeps their mouth shut, right? In the interest of time, I'm not going to elaborate on this, but it is absolutely incredible how everybody who's well known in Indian public life is actually not making money. All the fellows who are making money are keeping their mouth totally shut because at the heart of it is using mobile phone data in a very clever way, which is on the edges of what is permissible and what isn't permissible, right? Now let's get into the second layer of non-linearity, which is kicked in. So if you cast your mind back, right, September 2019, the FM cut the corporate tax rate from 35 to 25, let's say 25. She cut the corporate tax rate by a third, right? And yet, as she said in the recent budget, and as you can see in the data, direct tax collections as a percentage of GDP is an all-time high, right? So I studied economics at the LSE for 4 years. There wasn't a single course in economics which said that you can cut the tax rate by a third and you can collect way more money than you ever did. Why has this happened? And remember, it's just taken 3 years. Cut the tax rate, get collections to an all-time high. Why has it happened? Compliance has improved. Why has compliance improved? Compliance has improved. Why? Some digitization part of it, something else. Right? I think I heard someone say GST. Right? So one of the reasons living in India is a lot of fun is you just have to join the dots and make sense of it. What GST has done is made all of us in India extended arms of the enforcement directorate. Right? Because of the way GST works. Right? So the way GST works is, say Marcellus pays tax, but we get a rebate. We get a rebate if we name our suppliers. Right? And in fact, our net tax payment is zero after the rebate. Right? So the government is incentivizing everybody to say, name your suppliers so that you get the rebate. So we name our suppliers name their suppliers name their suppliers, and in a network effect, companies who never paid tax get caught, which is why the GST collections have done this. Now, when the GST tax inspector catches a tax evading company, does he keep the information to himself or does he share it with the direct tax man? I'm pretty sure he shares it. I haven't seen a YouTube video, but it'll be illogical for him not to share it. And when the direct tax guy finds a company that's evading tax historically, what does he do? First, he says to the owner of the company, pay tax on employees' salaries. Then he says, pay tax on your PBT. Then he says, pay tax on your personal income. And if you do the back of the envelope maths, a business which is 25% profit margin with zero tax is 0% profit margin at full tax. And this is happening en masse in India, mass scale pay. If you go to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs website, every year for the last 5 years, 800,000 companies are shutting shop. They are saying it's no longer worthwhile running this business. In fact, one of the reasons PMS Bazaar has a very fond place in my heart, some of our earliest meetings with them in Erode was people like this, who were still living in the delusion that they could do black money and buy real estate. And one of the nicest things about PMS Bazaar is they understood this change. They got hold of those clients. Those clients called us up 3 years later, saying, I've understood why you guys came to Erode. There is no future for me making tax evasion wala textiles. I'm shutting the factory down. Whatever black money I used to buy land with, I'm giving to you guys. Now, this is happening on a mass scale, right? Officially, 800,000 are shutting down. I reckon the real number of corporate shutdowns in India are 3 to 4 times that number. Small businesses who can no longer compete after paying tax are winding up. That market share is migrating. Right? It's migrating to Asian Paints, Titan, Pidilite. We've given you the plastic pipes industry, it's migrating to asphalt pipes. This will carry on. This will carry on because at the moment, India's tax to GDP, the FM said in the budget, central government tax to GDP is 12%. China is at 15%. China's arms budget is 7 to 10 times India's arms budget. India will need to get to 15%. Right? We will need 3% more of GDP as tax. That's roughly $100 billion. Do you think the big capitalists of Bombay, Delhi are going to pony up their 100 billion? No chance. The SME will pay that 100 billion. More SMEs will shut down, more market share will migrate to the formal sector. But there's another impact. The more you formalize the economy, the less people buy flats and gold and other nonsense, the more money flows into the financial system, which is why PMS Bazaar and Marcellus exist. So if you look at the data from SEBI, from RBI, from IRDA, in the last 4 years, $300 billion per annum is coming into the financial system from Indian domestic savings, which is why in many ways the foreign investors become quite irrelevant in India. We're doing $300 billion of domestic savings, right? A decade ago, that number wasn't even 50 billion. The more we save domestically, the more we push down the cost of capital, right? Natural, right? The more money you save domestically, 300 billion will keep rising, the more we push down the cost of capital. But as the cost of capital comes down, does everybody benefit equally? Or does the larger company benefit more than the smaller company? Unfortunately, the answer is the larger company does benefit more than the smaller company, right? A small jeweler can borrow from, let's say, an HDFC bank at 11%, but Titan borrows in the Bombay money market at 3%. Crushing competitive disadvantage for the small jeweler, right? So this is the third layer of change. Logistics, technology, cost of capital. Let's do one more. I'll skip the banking system in the interest of time. Let's do the technology piece. Right? So the story began with a man called Nandan Nilekani quitting as the CEO of Infosys in spring of 2009. Nandan then went to Delhi, built Aadhaar for the government. 2010, India launched Aadhaar. By 2014, we had created 1.4 billion Aadhaar IDs. All of us stood in a queue. We did our fingerprint and our retina, shetina. And by 2014, we had created 1.4 billion Aadhaar IDs. At which point, a new government came to power. 3 months later, the new Prime Minister met Nandan. It was in the newspapers. I don't know what they discussed, but what I do know is the very next month, Prime Minister Modi announced Jan Dhan. He said that by the end of 2015, every Indian has to have a bank account. Basically, in the next 14 months, he said, every Indian has to have a bank account. I have to admit, I was skeptical. I said, it can't happen here. How can you get 500 million people signed up to the banking system in 14 months? I'm happy to say I was wrong. What Nandan told the PM, I reckon, is Nandan told the PM that everybody's fingerprint contains their Aadhaar number. So all you have to do is create a scanner so that when a person jabs his finger into the scanner, the Aadhaar number is read off the fingerprint and the bank account opening form autofills. The bank account opening form autofills using the Aadhaar data. And that's how India opened 500 million accounts in a year. I used to visit the Delhi offices of the Department of Financial Services. Every morning there was a war room. Every morning the CMDs of Indian banks were told to report how many accounts have you opened in the last 24 hours. And if the number wasn't satisfactory, a sad future awaited the CMD of that bank, right? So through sheer mobilization on a war scale, by the end of 2015, we had 1.4 billion Aadhaar IDs. Every family had a bank account and we synced it together, right? Even then, it wasn't apparent to me what is the big benefit of all this. 2016, Mukesh Ambani ji announced Jio. Nandan flew to Delhi again, and the National Payments Corporation of India announced, I'm sure with the blessings of the powers that be in Delhi, the NPCI announced UPI, Unified Payment Interface. When they announced it in 2016, it wasn't clear to me what the benefit was. I don't think too many of us understood it. Through COVID, it became clear what the benefit was. So if you come to the present day, 52% of national income, 52% of Indian GDP now goes through UPI. That's $1.7 trillion goes through UPI. Every month, we are doing 7 billion peer-to-peer transactions on UPI. This number is doubling every 7-8 months. There is nothing like it anywhere in the world. Nothing remotely like it in America, China, Europe, anywhere in the world. This is huge. There are 3 simple use cases I can see already for us in India, for businesses like us. There are many more to come. Let's do the 3 most obvious use cases that UPI has created. And remember, this is very hard to create. For a Sweden or a Singapore or for an America to recreate this is going to be a decade of incredible grind. First use case. So let me give you an example. Outside our office, outside PMS Bazaar and Marcellus' office, there's a local tea stall, coffee stall, right? It's run by a young lad from Telangana. He came to Mumbai just after second wave of COVID. So in October 21, this youngster came and set up the stall. So I was amongst his first customers. So 1.5 years ago, I used to go to him. I used to give him a 50 rupee note. He used to give me 25 rupees a change and I would get my coffee. And in that era, 18 months ago, he had only around 500 customers a day, right? Straightforward coffee stall business. If you come to our offices today in Andheri East in Mumbai, if you go to that coffee stall, you will see a big sign, right? It says, no cash accepted, no credit cards accepted, only UPI. So I asked him 6 months ago. By 6 months ago, he's doing now 8,000 cups of coffee a day, from 500 down to 8,000. I asked him, why do you not take cash? He gave me a lesson in modern Indian business. He said, firstly, if I give you change, it takes me as much time to give you change as to make the coffee. So it kills my productivity by 50%. Secondly, he said, you can see this is a street side stall. I have no safe deposit vault. If you give me cash, I have to take it home on the local train. That's not safe for me. If I go to the bank at that time of the day, that's the time most of you guys come out for a cigarette and a coffee. I'm going to lose peak hour business. So I can't go to the bank. Neither do I have a vault. I don't want to take it home on the train. But most interestingly, he told me that the fellow who sells milk to me, the milk vendor to our coffee wala, the milk vendor used to come in a two-wheeler every 4 days to collect his cash. The milk vendor has said, boss, I can't be bothered every 4 days running around Bombay in two-wheeler. You send me the money every evening through UPI. Right? So milk vendor doesn't have to spend money, time running around Bombay in a two-wheeler. Plus, milk vendor's working capital cycle down from 4 days to 0 days. Right? So the coffee wala said, it's entirely in my interest to do this because you're no worse off, I'm better off. And if you see the data, 20% of Indian SMEs, NPCI is saying, 20% of Indian SMEs are only operating on UPI. Because this is the first layer benefit. Second layer benefit. If you are doing UPI, can you do tax evasion? Not possible, no. So that's the second reason why tax collection is growing twice as fast as GDP. Now let's do the third layer. Right? For every UPI holder, there's a bank account. You can't do UPI without a bank account, right? UPI is nothing but a way for me to transfer money to you from my phone to yours, but underlying it's a transfer from my bank account to your bank account. Now, as it happens, our coffee wala's bank account is with Kotak Bank. So what can the Kotak Bank manager in Andheri see? What he can see is this young lad from Telangana is selling 8,000 cups of coffee, multiplied by 25, that's his cash flow. He can see it through the day, real time. And if he can see that, he doesn't have to be a finance genius like Uday Kotak ji to figure out that this is the working capital finance opportunity of the generation. The whole of SME India, on your laptop, click by click, tick by tick, transaction by transaction. And what is Shashi Jagdishan Saab of HDFC Bank saying? What is Uday Kotak Saab saying? They are saying that the fastest growing part of their loan book is unsecured working capital finance for small businesses. It's growing at around 35% for these banks, right? So think of it from the coffee wala's perspective. from 25% cost of capital of borrowing in the informal market, in the Bombay black market, 25%, he's now come down to 11% cost of money at Kotak Bank. Now apply that on a national scale and imagine the transformation that's taking place. The next leg of this is ONDC. In the interest of time, I'm not going to get into ONDC. ONDC is equally disruptive, in fact, even more disruptive. It's owned by the Indian banks. There's a 10-city trial underway at the moment. Nandan Nilekani again is the visionary behind it. This promises to blow apart the Western e-commerce models quite comprehensively. Now, what does this all mean? Let's do a quick summary. Right? The more the government cracks down on tax evasion, the more the government squeezes small businesses on tax, the more small businesses will shut down. The more small businesses shut down, the greater the gain for larger businesses. The more small businesses shut down and they invest in the financial system, the lower the cost of capital. The lower the cost of capital, the greater the gain for large businesses. Right? Then coming to the next layer, the more we drive digitization in the country, the more UPI, the more mobile, the more 5G kicks in, the greater the benefit for large businesses. Small businesses are not as tech friendly. And all of this ecosystem, right, results in this chart. Right? So my colleagues and I, we are migrants to India. 2008, the Marcellus team migrated to India from the UK. At that time, when we first came to India, the top 20 businesses accounted for around 30% of the nation's profits. Right? That was then. If you see what's happened, today the top 20 businesses in India account for 70%. That blue line, the top 20 businesses in India now account for 70% of India's profits. Right? The polarization has been rapid, it's intense, it's changing the nature of the stock market. Why is it changing the nature of the stock market? On this blue line, every dot in the blue line represents percentage of companies in the Sensex outperforming the Sensex. Right? Percentage of companies in the Sensex outperforming the Sensex. So for example, when it says 70% here, what that means is in the decade ending 2013, 2003 to 2013, in the decade ending 2013, 70% of the Sensex constituents beat the Sensex, right? And you can see that this is the UPA era basically. This is the entire UPA era. It was a pretty broad-based stock market. 60 to 70% of Sensex companies were beating the Sensex, right? That's called a broad-based stock market. And then you can see what happens. You can see what happens as we get into the NDA era of rapid digitization, formalization, tax collection. The more we get into the NDA era, the more the stock market polarizes. The latest read, this is basically the decade ending June 22, starting 2012. So starting 2012, ending 22, right? In the decade ending June 22, only a quarter of the companies in the Sensex are beating the Sensex. Let me put it in a simple example. I went to school in Delhi in the 80s. There were 50 boys in the class. 10 of us studied, 40 of us partied, right? 10 boys dragged the class average mark up. So 80% of the class underperformed, 20% of the class outperformed, right? The Indian stock market has become like my class, right? It's become super polarized. The strong are getting stronger, and that gives you and me an epic opportunity to make money. So just to give you a sense of how epic the opportunity is, before I get into the process, I'll do a quick demonstration of how big the opportunity is. So we discussed, right, 20 companies now drive wealth creation in India. So let's just quantify this for everybody in this room. In the last 10 years, the Indian stock market has created 105 trillion rupees of wealth, right? Simple data. Take Nifty 10 years ago, Nifty today, we are up 105 trillion. 80%, that means 85 trillion has come from 20 large companies, right? Simple. 85 trillion has come from 20 large companies. 2 of them would be crony capitalists. You'll know the names of the crony capitalists. I don't have to tell you who the 2 crony capitalists are. Every person in this room will know the names of the 2 crony capitalists. 18 of them are not crony capitalists. They are firms like TCS, Infosys, HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, Titan, Bajaj Finance, Asian Paint. Right? These are well-known companies. Everybody's heard of these companies, right? Now, here is why living in India is an immense amount of fun. So let's take Titan. Titan has created 330x wealth in the last 20 years. Right? 330x wealth. Everybody's aware of Titan in this room. 330x wealth creation in the last 20 years. What is the name of the CEO of Titan? If you know the name of the CEO of Titan, please raise your hand. The guy who runs Titan today, raise your hand. Right? This is exactly how it is in India as well. By the way, Dubai is no different. I've always thought of Dubai as part of our own country only. Right? So if you ask a group of wealthy people in Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, that's where Titan is based. Nobody will know who runs Titan. It's a gentleman called C.K. Venkatraman. CKV we call him. C.K. Venkatraman runs Titan. Money machine, par excellence. Let's do one more. Bajaj Finance has created 70x wealth in the last 10 years. Right? Bajaj Finance, everybody's heard of Bajaj Finance? This is the late Rahul Bajaj's younger son, Sanjeev Bajaj. He's the promoter. Right? Now, my neighbor till a few years ago runs the company. He works 13 hours a day. He works 6 days a week. He works bloody hard to create 70x wealth for everybody here, hopefully your shareholders. The name of the CEO of Bajaj Finance is Rajiv Jain. Excellent. Delighted. Awesome. Right? So I think 5% of the room clearly knew the answer. That's very positive. Let's do a third one then. Asian Paints. Asian Paints, everybody's heard, right? I'm sure even sells here as well. 50% market share in India. 10x wealth creation in 10 years. 100x wealth creation in 20 years. 1000x creation in 30 years. Right? Wealth creation par excellence. The name of the CEO of Asian Paints is... So there was a voice there, go on. Somebody spoke up. Say that again, please, sir. No. Amit Single, yeah. So Bharatpur is Pidilite. Aditya Puri was Asian. Bharatpur is Pidilite. Amit Single, right? So one person out of 100 knew it. The point I'm driving at is the people who define modern India are some of the hardest working people in the world. These people whose names I'm mentioning, right? These are some of the hardest working people in the world. They're intensely smart, intensely driven, that building huge fortunes on the back of the change we've described, yet almost nobody knows their names. Almost nobody knows their names, right? And your and my job is to make money from that. Right? From a simple demonstration I gave, nobody knows their names. How can you and I make money from this? Step one, get rid of corrupt companies from your portfolio, right? So step one, use forensic accountant. If you don't know how to do it yourself, hire a good CA, get the crooks out of your portfolio. Like in any free market democracy, like in America, crook will come to loot you. You have to turn the crook away from the door using forensic accounting. 40% of India drops out there. Step two, you've got the crook out. You still need to get the incompetents out of the door. The incompetents will market themselves to you. They will be in your face with advertisements and media events. You got to get the incompetents out of your portfolio as well. Once you do these two, 90% of India drops out. 90% of India drops out. You're left with only 50 out of the BSE 500. And the final step is, out of those 50, identify companies who are selling their products to Indians at 20, 30, 40% price premium, whilst keeping their mouth shut, whilst keeping their profile invisible in the media. Every single person who will make you money in India, their names you will not know. By definition, if you know that person's name, that person will not going to make you money in India. Every single person who's building billions of dollars of wealth for us is what I call an unusual billionaire, right? That's the name of the book that we wrote. This book redefined Indian corporate strategy. It sells in every footpath in India. I think you can order from Amazon in India. Hopefully there'll be bookshops in Dubai which will stock it. Right? This is the book in which we've explained what these people quietly do. They build great fortunes for us, for our clients, but they keep themselves quiet. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you for this opportunity, Pallav. Thank you, PM, as well. Thank you.